Thank you guys so much for coming and for getting up in the morning and hanging out. Let's have a talk. I want to talk about chef-style DevOps Kungfu. And really, if we're going to talk, first we have to talk about DevOps. And I think the one thing for me that really resonates about DevOps is that it's unique to the people who have practiced DevOps. I tweeted something a little while ago about how whether people who feel like they have some ownership of the word DevOps, like it or not, DevOps now is actually just about the experience of all of these people who are doing all this work to transform their businesses. So, we may have felt like we had some ownership of what that word meant and over what it did and how it felt for people. But the truth is, there are now lots of people doing a thing that's called DevOps, and it's pretty much like the thing that we were doing. But it's not the same, because it's never the same, because it's actually unique to every single person that ever tries to do it. And what's similar between them, though, is that there's this constant struggle inside of DevOps. It came about for us who've done the work through, 10, 15, 20 years of actual practice and effort and hard work at trying to figure out how to run the web in a way that didn't suck, right? And that struggle is part and parcel of why it's so hard to define the definition. So that tweet I put out that was like, hey, I think DevOps is now just about this transformation that's happening in the enterprise. It started this crazy email thread where all these people were like, well, let's all get together and define it, but not if those guys are in the definition. If those guys are there, fuck them. They're definitely not doing DevOps, right? And so we had this whole sort of back and forth about whether you could even define it and what a definition would be and what's a good one, and should we all meet in a hotel in Utah and have an Agile summit or whatever. Which is fine. I like Utah. It'd be cool, but it's not. It didn't feel right. And as I reflected on that conversation and what I didn't like about it, I realized that the thing here is that we're thinking about defining it wrong, right? When we talked about defining DevOps, we were defining it as a thing. We were like, hey, DevOps it's a sentence. It's some thing, and we can say it, and then if you're not doing it, we can be like, no, you're not scrumming correctly or whatever, right? And I think that's wrong. I think it's more like Kung Fu. And when I thought of this, like everybody else, I thought of Kung Fu like Kung Fu, right? But then I went to Wikipedia and I looked up Kung Fu, and what I learned was Kung Fu has nothing to do with the thing necessarily. It actually just means, so Kong, Gong, I'm not Chinese and I don't know any of it, and so I feel kind of bad, but just work with me. Means work or achievement or merit. And then the Fu part is about man. It's about effort, and man in the sort of global sense of man, not man in the dude sense. And it's about the excellence achieved through long practice in one's skills. And what I liked about this was that that's really reflective of DevOps for me, right? The only way that any of us got there was through long practice of our skills. I remember Velocity in 2009, and that was full of people who had long practice of their skills. By the time we got to a place where anybody put those two things together and created that word, we were 15 years into a career. We definitely had practiced, right? And when we think about Kung Fu, we tend to think about Wushu, which is Chinese martial arts. So all these dudes are grandmasters of a particular style of Wushu, right? So they're all recognizably Wushu. We look at them and we're like, yep, those are monks, and they'll beat you up, and they'll cut a block with their hand, right? But each one of them is actually a master of a unique school of Wushu. They're different than each other. But when they get together, they still recognize each other as Wushu. They're like, oh yeah, Bob, definitely Bob, right? But Bob is not the same as Frank, right? And that's cool. They still recognize each other as Wushu. They're like, yep. And there's hundreds of different schools. There's not just one or two. There's a lot. And what how they recognize each other is that three things are consistent across all these different schools. So one is the basics of what it means to do Wushu, right? So there's just push-ups and the internal, external things, are we meditating and getting our mind right and those sorts of things. And that's pretty much the same across all of those schools. But then there's the forms they practice, and this is shared too across schools, but the emphasis varies super widely, right? So some of those guys are on one form end and some are on the other, but there's definitely a lot of intermingling, right? And then there's the specific application of their Kung Fu, right? Which comes out in sparring and a bunch of other things, but it also comes out in just using your Kung Fu in the world, right? And I think when we think about it this way, I really like what happens when I think of DevOps like this. And the reason is that it lets me do this. So this is Ben Grimm. He's the Thing. And he's from New York. And the thing about the Thing is that he does not really do wushu, right? He's humongous. He's made of rock. And he punches you in the face. That's his thing, right? And so if you saw that dude, you'd be like, he can punch out a bad guy. And you'd be stoked he was there. But you would never look at him and be like, that guy does wushu. Because it's not. Because the basics of what he's doing, those forms that make a wushu, it's not the same, right? He's a boxer. He's made of rock. He's going to punch you in the face. He doesn't need a lot of finesse, right? And so that I liked, because for me, I know DevOps when I see it, right? When I meet someone, regardless of their role or their title, where they work, or what their company does, or whether they're on the web or off the web, or like I know when I see them doing DevOps. And it's because there's this practical philosophy that we've established over time. And there's this broad well of experience that's unique to each of us as individuals. And we can recognize it by whether those basics and forms are present in what someone's doing and trying to do, right? And we can apply those things to our actual, real, honest life. And so through all this argument for definition and through all of this attempt to figure out what we should be and do, the truth is we don't need to win the war for a DevOps definition. What we need to do is make progress on our understanding of what it means to do DevOps. And if we can make progress on what it means to actually live that thing and to do it in the world, that will get us to a place where when we see somebody who's a killer but they're not doing DevOps, we can be like, hey, that's awesome. You're awesome at what you're doing. It's not DevOps because it doesn't feel like this. And they'll be like, oh, okay, I get it. And we can move the argument forward. Also, that fortune cookie's pretty sweet, right? Flickr, what's up? Okay, so the thing about DevOps is that it is actually right now reinventing how we run our businesses. And the important piece here is that it's doing it whether the people who feel they have some propriety over the phrase want it to or not. Right? It's already out. How many people in this room have DevOps in their title? Raise your hand. I don't, but I'm raising my hand to make you do it. Okay. So how many of you have heard someone tell you that you're doing DevOps wrong because you have it in your title? Every single one of you. Because you heard me tell you that shit, right? And I'm sorry I was wrong. I didn't understand it as Kungfu. So the truth is, it's great. If that's your job title, that's awesome. As long as you're doing the things that mean it, that's great. And if you need that signifier to get other people to recognize that they too need to get some Kungfu, man, I think it's dope. Okay. So who practices our DevOps Kungfu? The answer is everybody, because the thing that we're doing with our DevOps Kungfu, which we maybe didn't understand but we do now, is we are working to change the way our businesses function. And that means that the application we do will be different, right? If you're the CEO, I watch Barry Christ all the time because he's amazing and he's my boss. And I know Barry Christ does DevOps, right? And most people wouldn't say their CEO does DevOps, but I know that the reason he does a lot of the things he does, the beliefs he holds dear and why he thinks they're right, man, those things are DevOps. They're the same principles as mine, right? I recognize him in the same way that I would recognize John Cowie as having strong DevOps Kung Fu, or Bridget, or anybody else, right? And in this way, we know that we're not generalists, right? I watch Tucker. Tucker runs sales for Chef. I know for a fact Tucker does DevOps, right? I don't think he says it that way because he's a sales dude and he's like, I don't know that I do DevOps. But the truth is, I know what he believes too, and I've watched him do it. And I know that he does it. And in this way, you can understand that we're not generalists, right? We're not just this one thing that does DevOps and then everybody else is excluded. The truth is, we're hyper-connected specialists, and that's the number one thing that binds us all together, right? So this presentation is my chef-style DevOps Kung Fu. And I'm calling it chef-style because I wrote Chef, and it's my company, and so I get to do whatever I want. Also, I couldn't come up with a better name. So, it comes out of my personal experience, just like everybody else's. I'm a systems administrator. I'm a software developer. I'm a father. I'm all sorts of different things, and they're all sort of bound up inside of it. And as I wrote the rest of this deck, there were a lot of different people who came to mind that sort of added into my Kung Fu, and I won't read through the list, and the list is definitely not complete. So if you're not on this list, it's not because you didn't contribute, it's because I ran out of room. I want to make a special call out for Sammy Hagar and Ronnie James Dio, because they're very strong influencers on my particular Kung Fu. Okay. So this is the foundational document of my Kung Fu, and it's up on GitHub. And when you're done watching this presentation, if it resonates with you and you feel like this is your Kung Fu too, you can send a pull request to this repository, and you can join my school of DevOps Kung Fu. And when someone asks you, what is DevOps, and what does it mean to you, and what is it you want, and what are you seeking by using this word, you can just point them at this presentation, and we'll post the link to the movie, and that is what you mean. And we can work together to better define the principles and forms and applications that I'm going to go through in this deck. And you can start your own school. So if you get there and you're like, I like 95% of what Adam said, but there's this part where he talks about using the right tool for the right job, and I kind of think that's toxic, and I really prefer thinking about using the most boring tool for the job, which is another thing. There was a great blog post, and I loved it. And also, I don't want to use the most boring thing because it's boring. Got to have a different phrase. But if you feel that way, you can fork it, and you could start your own school, and you could be like, this is Bob's school of chef-style Kung Fu, and you just have to give some attribution. So, all enough about that. But you can go do it and join my school if you like it. Okay. So, if this is a school of DevOps, what are the elements of DevOps? What makes a DevOps style? And really, there's three things. So, in Wushu, we call it the basics. I think that we shouldn't use the basics because the basics include push-ups, and there's no push-ups in DevOps. So, that's my first rule. Not mandatory push-ups. You should totally do push-ups, but just, you don't have to. Okay. So instead, I think we should talk about the universal principles we all share. And I believe that list needs to be short, and these are really the core of the things that when we see them, we know what we're doing as DevOps. And then there's the forms we practice. So these are the things we actually do in our job, right? And the way we do them and why we do them the way we do. And those are shared across multiple styles of DevOps. And then there's the application of DevOps in your actual day, in your life, in your career. And that's unique to you, and we'll cover that too. Okay, what are the principles of DevOps? So these are the universally held beliefs that make you recognize that what you're doing is DevOps and not something else. This is John Allspaw. John Allspaw is worried about me because I'm about to define DevOps. So are we ready? John, can we do this? Okay, let's do it. DevOps is a cultural and professional movement focused on how we build and operate high-velocity organizations born from the experiences of its practitioners. So that is what DevOps means. Let me break it down. So first, it's a cultural and professional movement. So it's culture, like hip-hop is culture, or like heavy metal is culture, or like otaku is a culture. We had furries at the show last night. It's culture like furry. It's also professional, like MC or lead guitarist or animator, right? And it's both of those things. So you can be doing DevOps and not be a professional person who does DevOps or a thing like it, right? You can just be in the culture of DevOps. But you can also have a job in which you practice your DevOps, but the two aren't necessarily connected. Focused on how we build and operate things. So building stuff is awesome, and if we're doing DevOps, we definitely care about the details of how and why we build it the way we do. We also care deeply about what it means to operate that thing over time, right? High-velocity organizations. It turns out that our experiences, as far as I can tell, were uniquely about building high-velocity organizations, right? Everybody I know who does DevOps, that's the thing that they're doing and why they're doing it. And it also, I believe, turns out that if you take these same principles and you apply them to low-velocity organizations or low-velocity problems, what you get is instability, and it sucks. So if you're not trying to go fast or wanting to, then maybe less DevOps. It's born from the experiences of its practitioners. So, originally I had on this slide that it was born from the experiences of the web innovators. But it turned out that that's not necessarily true. I was talking with a couple of people at this show and in other places where they've totally been doing DevOps as long as I have or longer, and they were in like an insurance company and there was no website at all. So I think there were a whole bunch of us that were sort of first explorers of DevOps. And it's important to remember where you came from. So we should call out the fact that the web innovators are a part of it. But really, DevOps is a thing that comes from experience, and it comes from the doing of your craft. If you're not honing your skills over time in the craft, you're not doing it. So one of the things that implies is that you can't just get there with talent, right? You can't just show up and be like, I am a natural-born systems administration killer. You have to actually do the work to have your Kung Fu become strong, right? Okay, so what are the principles of DevOps, if that's what it means? So the first one, this is maybe a repeat from last year, but you got to stick with me because I have the microphone. So the first one is that you're going to design for the safety, contentment, knowledge, and freedom of both your peers and your customers. So safety's first. So this is human safety. It can also mean information safety, right? And you can also think of this simply as the ability for individuals to act without fear of unintended consequences, right? Can we build a system and an organization and a way of moving that allows people to express themselves in a way without getting hurt, right? And you can think of this technically too. Safety is a slider, and it moves beyond you sort of without your help. So if you think about Twitter, prior to the Arab Spring, it was mostly a thing that nerds used to talk to each other. And then one day, Twitter was hanging out doing Twitter, and all these people were relying on that as a communication medium to do things like avoid a tank and not get shot, right? And so in that moment, the safety slider on Twitter shot through the roof, right? And the people who did that work knew that it had, and boy, they were paying attention to make sure it worked, right? And that was good, and they were really strong DevOps Kung Fu in that moment. They focused on contentment. So contentment's about being satisfied with the things you have. So as you practice your DevOps Kung Fu, for sure one thing that will happen is you will have bad days. And on those bad days, you will not be happy. And because of that, happiness is not a realistic goal of your DevOps Kung Fu practice. But contentment is. If we can get to a place where you feel good about the people you're with, you feel good about the systems you're building, you feel good about the outcomes that are coming, then most days are happy days, right? And even on bad days, you have this community of people you can rely on to help that contentment spike sort of get you through it. Knowledge. So access to knowledge is a leading indicator of social progress, right? So the goal isn't to minimize the knowledge we need. It's to provide access to the wealth of that knowledge, right? And it's to make sure that people can access that knowledge when they need it, right? So out the right knowledge at the right time. And so one example here would be your financial data, right? So if you have engineers that you're trying to have be really highly empowered to move the needle on the business, but they can't see the amount of revenue you're pulling in and why, how are they going to do that, right? How can they even postulate a question if they can't see the data? So how many people right now could go look at the financial data of their company? Not enough of the room. Okay, so, more. More of you need to be able to. Freedom. So this is the power or right to act or speak or think without hindrance or restraint. And the reason freedom is important is that one of the things we're doing is empowering each other to actually act, right? It's about looking at all these people, regardless of what they do, inside your organization, and giving them freedom of movement and trusting their skills. So that story about the dance party is a good example, right? So I didn't know Carolyn very well. We had this conversation. She was like, my buddy Derek, what's up, Derek? Is going to DJ ChefConf. It's going to be the best. And I'm like, that sounds great. Just make sure he doesn't think he's going to have a dance party, right? And she was like, I have freedom to act now, and it's going to be fine. So there won't be a dance party, right? But inside, she was like, there's going to be a dance party. And now she has freedom to do whatever she wants until the end of time. That's what happened there. Literally, I told her, you just get to do what you want, and then I do what you say. Okay, let's talk about people over products over companies. So people who have strong DevOps foo, and when I see it, I know it. This is probably the number one thing that I use to just have a quick vet of whether I think someone's doing DevOps or not, is that when they talk about what they're doing and they talk about why they're doing it, they talk about people first. They don't talk about products. They don't talk about companies. They talk about the human beings who are doing the work. And that is for me, the number one vetting criteria I have for whether this is working out and whether what you're doing is DevOps or what you're doing is just trying to go faster in some other way, right? And you can think about this in contrast to my experience. So like in the beginning of my career, you used to have a relationship with a vendor, right? You'd be a CA shop, or you're an IBM shop, or you're an HP shop, right? And when you had a problem, let's say identity management, what you'd do is call your preferred vendor, right? You'd be like, IBM, I have an identity management problem. Do you have an identity management product? And IBM would be like, hell yeah, I do, $1.5 million. And you'd be like, awesome! And then you'd buy it. And then that product may or may not work. Let's just be honest, it didn't. Not just IBM. It's not because IBM was bad. None of them worked, right? Because they weren't actually built for human beings, right? The way they sold them was from the top. They were like, oh, you have a vendor relationship, right? And one thing you might notice is that DevOps doesn't really value that. So I'll use Chef as a good example. The way that Chef gets sold, so my sales reps are over here and they just got really nervous, like they all just really sat up. But the way that we actually sell our product is this way. Human beings use Chef to try to make their jobs better, maybe. So step one, are you making your jobs better? Is your experience better? Is the day that you have better? If that happens to happen, in the chef community or next to people who are in the chef community and practicing chef-style DevOps Kung Fu, you have a pretty good shot of trying my product out. And if my product also makes your lived experience better, so if in using it you're like, yeah, this is pretty all right, I feel good about this, it made my life better, then I have a shot at having a sales rep come over and be like, so, we have some things that could make your life even better, right? And maybe you should give us money. And you'll be like, yeah, I want to give you money, right? And next thing you know, it's been sold. And that's a very DevOps way of selling, right? It's so easy, right? What could go wrong? Okay. I'm on stage, there's lights, Johnny's back there, I have a DJ, right? It's working. Okay, so... Okay, so another way we know is that we are lean, right? So, this was an interesting one to put up because we had a lot of conversations as I was doing it. I'm like, can you do DevOps if you're not lean? And you know what? My answer is no, you really can't. So whether you recognize that this is your words or not, you're doing these things if you're doing DevOps well or you want to be. So one thing you're doing is you're looking at the process and procedure that you run your company by, and you're trying to eliminate waste. Right? So you're trying to look at that process and be like, what are the things in here that I don't need to be doing, right? And then you stop doing those things. The next thing you do is you prefer systems that work by a pull over things that work by push. And what I mean by that is that the pull of demand, so the things that are happening your customers need or that your company needs, but outside of your actual job, that pull of demand is what aligns your process and your resources, rather than the push down of central planning, right? So rather than having your boss be like, do this, conquer market, right? You're gonna pull through as the market demands the right stuff that needs to happen, right? You're gonna practice Kaizen. So one thing that's super true about everybody I know who has strong DevOps Kung Fu is that they're never satisfied with their Kung Fu, right? They're always improving themselves. They're always running that practice. They're always doing the things they need to do to make that right. We practice kaikaku, so we understand that there are moments where that continuous improvement cycle where we look at our existing process doesn't get us to where we need to go. There's something else that needs to change that's disruptive, that's bigger than our process. And then in order to get the results we need to get, in order to be as good as we want to be, we have to blow it up a little bit. And we know the difference between the moments where we need to blow it up and the moments where we need to just get a little better. And then finally, we work in small batches and we experiment. So we prefer to deliver things in small pieces, and we prefer to understand why we're doing it. Maybe click, there we go. Okay, so the people who have strong DevOps Kung Fu also have a particular relationship to failure, right? And this relationship is essentially that they see it as a learning opportunity. So when things go wrong, one of the things they do is they try to figure out what went wrong and why, and how they can not go wrong the same way again. But one feature of this that's also important is that they kind of think of failure as a status quo thing, right? They don't look at failure and be like, I failed today, I feel really bad about it. Failure just happens, right? So in the operational sense, this is a bad analogy, but I'm gonna use it anyway. It's kind of like if you had a fireman who every time there was a fire, they panicked, right? They were like, oh my God, a building's on fire and people could die, right? And if you saw that, you would not trust your fire department, right? You'd be like, dude, I'm the one who freaks out. You're supposed to be the mellow big guy that saves me, right? And in the same way, we're not the ones who freak out, right? We're the ones who just get it done and fix it. And we don't feel, and that comes from this feeling up and down the chain that failure isn't an anomaly. It's not abnormal. It's actually just the thing you do. We have ubiquitous workflow automation. So this is about making the easy path of doing anything flow with the principles and beliefs that you hold about what create good outcomes, right? This is like making Conway's Law work for you by tool choices, right? And I think the donut machine here is actually an excellent illustration of this principle, because what they want out of those donuts is delicious donuts that taste like the donut that you had last week that was delicious every single time. And so to get it, they built a workflow. So there was a donut workflow that started out with a guy with some donut dough, and he was like punching out donuts by hand, and he was dipping them in a fryer, and he had a little timer, right? And he was like, okay, are my donuts done, right? And he was checking them, but then the donuts, inconsistent results, right? Making donuts that way could be delicious, like artisanal handmade donuts, but could also suck, because you could get distracted. The donut machine, on the other hand, runs donuts through a vat of hot grease at a particular rate and then dumps them out the other side when they are perfect little delicious nuggets of good times. And that is the same thing as the way we run our own workflow and we manage our own stuff. We value diversity. The thing that we're doing with our DevOps is changing and transforming the way our companies run. And to do that, you need human beings who do lots of stuff. You need CEOs, you need sales reps, you need software developers, network guys, security people. We need all of those people in the tent. And all of them are necessary to do it. And more than that, we need them to come from different backgrounds and different points of view and different places on the globe. And the reason is that we need the ideas that they generate and their points of view to feed back into each other. And the more of those we have, and the more diverse those bonds are, and the more diverse the people are who make it up, and the stranger their backgrounds are, and the more weird stuff they've done, the more frenetic, strange connections happen, and the better the outcomes become. So we value diversity. And if you're not sure what I mean by this, if you played Dungeons & Dragons, just imagine you had a party of 5 fighters heading into the Tomb of Horrors. And then think about what's about to happen to you, right? You're all gonna die, just in case you didn't know. In a minute. Like you're gonna go in and be like, it's a trap! And then everybody's dead. And that's what'll happen if you're not diverse in your DevOps. Thank you. Okay. So those are the things that I believe let you know DevOps when you see it, right? So when I look out at someone and they're like, I do DevOps, and I ask them, oh, what's that mean? And they start talking about people, and they start talking about how they build safe systems and how they're doing workflow automation, and they're talking about all the different people they know and the conversations they had with their marketing dude. I know that they are doing DevOps. And so what are the things we actually do in our job, though? It's not enough just to talk about our philosophy. There are some things we do that we believe create better results. And so what are those? So these are the forms, and they're shared between styles, and there's a lot of them. So let's go. So the first one is you're gonna have a sense of purpose that's bigger than yourself and bigger than the thing you're doing. So a good example here is that you really shouldn't be having a sense of purpose. If the reason you go to work every day is to write a line of code, that's a bad sense of purpose, right? And we have lots of evidence that tells us that human beings just need to have a reason to do something great. And if you give them a reason, they will rise, right? Absent that reason, they'll just go to work, right? And so number one thing you have to have is a sense of purpose that's higher than the thing that's in front of you, right? Have a reason you're doing the things you do. It needs to be public and shared. It needs to be short because you're going to repeat it all the time. So if you're a CEO or an executive and you want to see a change in your organization toward DevOps, one of the things you're going to do is every time that you have a meeting, you're going to repeat your purpose over and over and over again. Because quite frankly, most people won't hear it until the 50th time you say it, right? So you're going to shoot for one sentence. You're going to include the people you're trying to help. You're going to include the product or thing that you're building in order to help them. And then you're going to include the change that you want to see that come about in them based on using your product. So here's Chefs. So we want the most enduring and transformative companies to use Chef to become fast, efficient, and innovative software-driven organizations, right? So who am I trying to help? I'm trying to help the most enduring and transformative companies, right? The people who want to endure, they want to transform, they want to go fast, they want to do those things. That's who I'm helping, you guys, right? Who is helping them? Chef. That was easy, right? That's a super short piece of your thing, right? IBM, because you can help. Okay, so then, I felt like I made fun of them unfairly, so I had to give them a moment. Okay, so, and then you have to include the change that you think people will see. So how are they going to change? Well, they're going to become fast, efficient, and innovative software-driven organizations. Brian Hale made this up. So this sentence, we were all sitting in a room trying to figure out what it was, and it wasn't Barry Christ or me or Jay Wampold who runs marketing. It was Brian. It was just he was part of the team, and he came up with the thing, and that is our purpose because he nailed it. Okay, you're going to have beliefs, and these are the things that you believe bring about good outcomes in your environment, right? You're going to write them down. They're going to be public too. So the first slide is your purpose. The second slide is reminding people that you have things you believe and that we're doing our best to be those things, right? You're going to write them down. You're going to make them public. And you're going to write them down in active voice. So even if you're not doing them. So a good example was, I want to believe that we always fix the builds when they go red. But we don't. And so rather than writing the sad trombone sentence that's like, we really ought to fix the builds, instead, just write it down and be like, we always fix the builds when they're red. And then when the build stays red, somebody will be like, don't we believe that we fixed that? And they'll be like, yeah, we totally do. All right, I'll fix it, right? But if it's the sad trombone voice, they'll be like, oh, I know, we always fail at that one. Okay. Include the principles of DevOps, because that's the thing you're trying to do, and you know it when you see it. You're going to mix in the things that are unique to your industry or your problem, because you have them. I have things that are unique to mine. You have stuff that's unique to yours, so make sure those are included, because it's not a one-size-fits-all problem. So here is the number one belief that we quote most often at Chef, and it is that we build software for people who use that software. So we try to do the right thing for those people, even if it's hard for us, right? So even if the thing we're trying to do makes our life harder, we're going to do that harder thing in the name of the user, right? And we call that, so we distill that to the right hard thing. And so a good example there was we were working with a customer, and we'd been trying to do it remotely for months. And we just were having trouble having everybody connect and understand what everybody was trying to say. And so like we had to put people on an airplane and go sit in a room with that customer and be like, hey, what do you mean when you say these words? And they were like, oh, we mean this. And we were like, oh, awesome, we mean this. And they were like, oh, that's interesting. We should figure out how that comes together. And then they spent a week and they shipped like 9 features and they super improved the status quo, and now that's a very happy customer, right? That was the right hard thing. The easy thing would have been to be like, that customer sucks. They never listened to us. I wish they would do that. Like, and they'd spent months doing it. They didn't want to get on a plane, but they needed to get on a plane, right? So they did the right hard thing, got on a plane, solved that customer problem, right? It was good. You need to have empowered teams. And here's how you're going to build them. So you're going to give them permission to act. So a team is not empowered if they can't make decisions. So if you're like, I have empowered teams, and you're like, well, what choices could they make? And you're like, no choices. No choices. They do what I tell them to do through the backlog. Obey team backlog. Go team backlog. Then you haven't empowered the team. You've just made them small and given them a straw that they need to eat from. So they have to actually have some permission to make choices. They have to pair this up with the context they need to make good decisions. So it's not enough also to say, it's on you, man. Make choices. Go forth and do the right thing. And then not tell them what's going on or what the right thing would be, right? So they have to know enough about what's happening to actually be able to make that decision. And for the record, you won't actually be able to give them that in advance. So really what this means is you have to be available and get people to a place where they trust you because you always do it. That whenever they come to you for context, whenever they show up in front of you and they're like, why are we doing this thing? Or what is happening with this? You have to tell them and give them the context they need in as much detail as they need it. And then they can go make better decisions. You have to pair this up with leaders who care about your purpose. So there's a lot of people in the world who are good leaders, and they're capable of leading, but they may or may not actually like the thing you say you want to have happen in the world, right? So if you want to come be a leader at Chef, but you're not quite sure that you want to empower high-velocity organizations to go through this change, you probably shouldn't be in a leadership role at Chef, right? You could work at Chef, and that might be okay, but maybe you shouldn't run a team because you don't really understand or believe why we're doing the things we do, which means you probably won't get other people to do it either. You need to have your beliefs be shared as well. So they have to look at that list of beliefs, and they can't snigger, right? They can't look at those beliefs and be like, yeah, that one's dumb though. I'm never doing the right hard thing, right? Like they actually have to believe it. And so when you watch those leaders and you look at those beliefs and they're like, yeah, except for belief number 5. Belief number 5 is for suckers. You got to be like, hey man, belief number 5 is how we do. So like, we're just going to go with belief number 5, and you're going to have to just eat it a little. Because otherwise they're going to ruin the team. So for the record, they'll break the team and it's not cool. Okay, you have to diversify your bonds. Okay, so at least some people got that joke. All right. This means taking people out to lunch, having meetings, and talking to people who don't do what you do, right? You have to ask them what they do. Try to understand their problems and their perspective. How many people in this room have ever sold software for a living? How many of you know a sales rep who works in your company by name? The whole, next year we're going to do this again. I'm going to put a slide up. Every single person in this room better raise their motherfucking hand. How many of you like your job? Do you like your job? You like your job? I like my job. Job's cool. You know why my job happens? Because they sold software. You don't even know who they are. You don't even know their name. That is sad. Sad. Know their name. Know what they do. Know why they why do they do the thing they do, right? How about lawyers? How many people know the name of their lawyers? You know your name of your lawyer? It's pretty good. Okay, that's better. You know more lawyers than sales reps. Let's tell you about sales reps. Yeah, ouch. But right, you got to know all these people: lawyers, finance people, sales, marketing, biz dev, software development, systems administrators, security people, product people. It's okay, because I bet if this was a sales rep conference and I was like, how many software developers you know, they'd be like, wah, 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 right? So, but like, you got to connect everybody together, and you got to know all these people, because sometimes you're going to have some decisions that you want to have happen that really move the needle on the business. You're going to find those things, and they can come from anywhere, where you're like, man, if we would do this thing, this whole joint's going to pop off. It's going to be the best. And in that moment, what you need is a little bit of consensus on that important decision. So you don't need consensus on every decision, and that's death. But every once in a while, you're going to have an idea as a software developer, as a systems administrator, that will change everything about the direction of your business. And in that moment, you are going to need to be able to use those bonds to circulate your idea amongst all these different people at all different levels of the business: sales reps, marketing guys, legal people, CEOs, all network guys, security people. You're going to have to use all of those bonds to get it done. And you're going to tell them what you want, you're going to listen to what they say, and you're going to put their feedback into your plan, right? And what you're doing here is awesome. You're making that plan their plan, right? It's legal's plan, it's security's plan, it's the sales guy's plan, it's all our plans, everybody's plan. It's not your plan. You didn't bring it in and just drop it off and be like, obey, right? You circulated it, you got their feedback, you knew what mattered to them, you knew how they worked, right? And then you come back to that same group and you're like, hey guys, is this a good idea? Should we do this? Is it right? And you'll ask them, and they'll say yes. Or no, but if no, you probably didn't do enough talking, and you probably didn't have enough diverse bonds, and most likely someone in that meeting was surprised they were there, and they were surprised by the thing that you said. Okay, you're gonna have a strong value proposition for your product. So this is really about making products that people love, and one great way you can screw up your product is to focus on vitamins instead of painkillers. So a food analogy here is to say broccoli is good for you. So how many people believe broccoli is good for you? I believe broccoli is good for you. How many people love broccoli? Most of the same people. All right, you ruined my analogy. So I like broccoli, right? And I'll eat my broccoli, but I don't love broccoli. Like, I don't sit down, I don't go to a restaurant and be like, ooh, a plate of broccoli, right? It doesn't happen that way. So if you think about painkillers and not vitamins, broccoli is a vitamin. People tell you, eat broccoli. And you're like, all right, I'm eating broccoli because I don't want to die. But then you go to ask someone, you're like, can I have some cheese on my broccoli? And they're like, no cheese. We don't do cheese here because it's bad for you, right? That's no good, and you don't like it when it happens. And so there's a lot of products built into their core is a good thing, broccoli. And then they're like, why don't people use my product? It's clearly technically superior. And the reason probably is you told them to eat their broccoli, right? Like, just, okay, it's good for me. Also, I hate it. I don't like you. And I don't want to eat broccoli every day. So, no. I don't care that you're right. Just no. Make something people love. It's not enough for people to like it. They have to love it. And I'll talk in a second about how you're going to get them to love it, because it's easier than you think. But they need to love your product, and they need to love what you do. It's not enough to like it. And you have to focus on what people need, but not on what they want. And this is actually tricky. So one customer needs a thing, and they'll need it very loud. They'll want a thing, right? And they'll want it very loudly. So they'll come to you and be like, I need this. But if they're the only one, then that means all of your other customers, they don't actually need it, right? One customer wants a feature. They're like, I want this. 50 customers need a feature, right? And you want to give them the features they need, not the features they want. Unless they're really spending a lot of money. Okay. And I can say that because I know my sales reps. What's up, guys? Okay. You're going to build a roadmap. You're going to start with your vision. You're going to align it with customer feedback. You're going to balance innovation with customer needs. You're going to group that roadmap into themes, and you're going to set an outcome for each theme, right? So I have an outcome. So here's a theme on my roadmap was ecosystem development. And one outcome I really want to see there is I want companies that aren't Chef selling Chef and making me money without me doing anything, That was a goal for this year. It was a super good goal, right? I want the ecosystem to like sell some chef. Sounds awesome, right? And then we gave that theme and that outcome to a team, which is big and meaty. I didn't tell them, and you will achieve this outcome through the following, although we had some guesses. And those guesses were the features that we put on the roadmap, right? So we put some things in a square, and we were like, I think these things might help. Team, right? And then the team looked at those things, and they're like, yeah, they sound pretty good, right? But what's actually going to happen is they're going to go out and validate those themes with customers. They're actually going to try doing it, and they're going to be like, is it working? Is the ecosystem kicked up yet? Are they selling my software better? Is it happening? And if it's not, they're going to do something else because they know what the outcome is we're looking for, right? They don't just have the list of features that we put on the roadmap that they have to deliver. And so if you're doing this well, your themes will hold. So if you have a one-year roadmap, you would like to see the themes not change on your roadmap. Because if they do, that means you're just playing bad strategic baseball, right? Your outcomes may or may not hold, right? I would like to have people selling Chef for me without my sales reps having to sell it, and we all just make a bunch of money. But we also could not do it, right? But we're good at what we do, so we assume they will. And then the features absolutely will not hold, right? So the features themselves, the words you put on the roadmap in each box, they're pretty much, lies is a strong word, but they're not going to happen the way you say that they will, right? And a way that you know you get this wrong is when you go backwards up this list. All of the features that you said you should have will hold, right? None of the outcomes you wanted are true, and all of the themes were wrong. And that's because you stuck to your guns on the features that you predicted would happen on the roadmap. Okay, inside your roadmap, you're always going to have delighters. And so this is a simplified version of the Kano model of product development. But essentially, you're going to have features that people just need to have, must have in a product, right? And if you don't have them, then you're just insufficient as a product. And then there are these features that when you see them, you're like, yeah, that was awesome. I love that feature. So one of those for me is being able to paste an animated GIF into a comment box on code review. And as soon as I did that ever in my life, I was like, that is the best, right? And the first place I saw that was actually at Facebook. I should have been GitHub, but it wasn't. It was Facebook because I sent this pull request at Facebook, and then everybody replied with like, woo! And there was like monkeys and all this crazy stuff, and it was awesome. And I wanted that thing. I was like, oh, yes, that is delightful. And so as the team that spun up doing delivery was hard at work on core features of delivery, like, I don't know, delivering software, I was sending pull requests to add animated GIFs and embedded YouTube videos. Right? And if we'd made a list, if we'd gone out and surveyed customers and been like, hey, customers, what's important to you? Not one person would have been like, no animated GIFs, not using it. Right? But you need that. It's actually what makes people love your software, right? Like, you like that Ojai is called Ojai just a little, don't you? Like the, right? It's because it's delightful. You didn't need it. If I took a survey, you'd be like, well, we should probably call it System Stats Collector R. Okay. But that's not delightful. Okay. You're going to build features, and you're going to do it iteratively rather than incrementally, right? And this, I think, is the most awesome version of this that I've ever seen. So here's what happens. The incremental approach to painting the Mona Lisa, right? So in your mind, you're like, I'm going to make a painting today, and I'm feeling good about myself. You would need to, in order to incrementally paint the Mona Lisa, you would need to have seen what the Mona Lisa should be in your mind first. And then you paint her head. And you're like, yeah, her head's looking good. Look at all those colors. Her head's awesome. And then you're like, hey, she should have an arm, because my Mona Lisa head is just creepy, right? And so then you paint her arm, and then you rock out Mona Lisa's other arm, and now you have a fully formed Mona Lisa, right? And that's pretty cool. The bummer is, what if you didn't like her head, right? Like, what if she was like the wrong shape, or those colors were wrong, and you needed a neon Mona Lisa? Like, you have no way to know. And so working iteratively is actually how you paint the Mona Lisa, right? So you think to yourself, I think we need a picture of a woman in a pastoral setting. And you build a sketch. And you're like, does that look like a woman in a pastoral setting? Does everybody, do you think so? Looks pretty good. Like, we can look at it and be like, yeah, that looks about right. I dig it. And then if they asked for feedback, if you're like, do you have feedback on my sketch? Your first piece of feedback is, I think she needs some color. Like, she's a little bland, right? And so you put some color on it. But not all the color, just some. You were like, I don't know, is this the right hues? Does it feel right? Does it evoke the right mood? And I'd come back to you and be like, hey, how do you feel about this? And you'd be like, wow, it looks a lot better than your sketch. I super like that burnt orange you used. That umber is really popping. And then you actually do it, and you finish the painting, and you're like, oh my God, it's the Mona Lisa. And it hangs at the end of a big, long hallway, and you're all snarky when you go to the Louvre, and you're like, it's just a painting of a woman in a pastoral setting. It's not a big deal. And then you walk in, and you go like this, and you're like, holy shit, there's a woman in a pastoral setting, right? And it's like really stark, and it's like she's hanging out over there, and there's a hill, and it's pretty awesome. And that is the power of iteration over incrementalism. Managing risk. So you're going to manage the risk that you encounter. All of us have risk in our businesses and in our choices, and you're going to manage that risk by doing small batches with a near-term hypothesis. You're building for high velocity, so these small batches are super important. And one value of small batches is that they allow you to form hypotheses that are smaller than giant ones. So you don't have to have a hypothesis that's like, and I will make $100 million. You can have a hypothesis that's like, can I move this thing forward by 1%, right? And validation of those hypotheses comes from customers, not from you. So you can't come up with a plan, execute your little plan, look at your own work, and declare it good, right? Which is tempting, but inefficient. And what you're really doing here is moving risk from the end to the front, right? So you're introducing near-term volatility. You might have to have a really fast and sharp change of direction early when you get it wrong, and that feels more volatile. So as software developers, you hear this a lot, where you're like, oh, I need you guys to leave me alone for 2 weeks at a time and only interact with me through my backlog refinement meeting, right? So that's not super cool, because what's happening is you're however long that iteration is, you're batching up risk. You're like, I don't know, for the next 2 weeks, I get to go risk-free. Like, I'm going to do whatever crazy thing I feel like for 2 weeks, and then fine. It's better than nothing. But in the end, what you're really shooting for is decreasing that near-term volatility, increasing near-term volatility, right? You might do more different weird things, but long-term, you're much more likely to get a good outcome. You're not going to worry about scale, because you don't have a scale problem until you do have a scale problem. But even when you think you have a scale problem, you actually don't have a scale problem, and you should stop thinking about it. Unless you're one of the people in this room who's thinking to yourself, I have a scale problem, and you're that dude, maybe that guy, but I don't know. And there's probably a few more of you, but most likely, when you actually break your problems down into small pieces, they're not scale problems. So you're just not going to worry about it until you have to worry about it. And as you get better at your Kungfu, you're going to know when you do have a scale problem, and it's going to be okay. But your default position is, I don't worry about scale problems. One of the reasons is it helps you to be iterative. So one great reason people say that they have to do incremental software development is that they're super worried about whether it's going to work when 1 million people try it. But you haven't had one person try it, because you've got 6 months of effort embedded in trying to make it work for 1 million of them. You don't have a scale problem. You don't. Until you do, but you don't. Okay. You are going to get into arguments about theory, right? So after this presentation, I promise you, one of you is going to come up to me and be like, I don't know about this point. And what I'm going to do is send you on a mission, and that mission is to execute. You're going to go do some work and validate your theory argument. So you're going to go try it, either my theory or yours, and then we're going to look at the outcomes, and then we're going to choose which one we like better. But we're going to solve that theory argument not by continuing to argue, but instead by doing work. You are going to demo. You're going to demo every single week. Every week. Not every 2 weeks, not every 5. You're going to demo every single week. Every single person who does anything, right? So if you have anything to show, you're going to demo it. You're going to invite the whole company to your demos. So if you work at GE, I don't know if they have an alias that's like all. But don't you kind of hope they do? where all equals a nation state. They're like, Troy! Okay, so... I want, you should invite every single person to look at your demos. They might not show up, because they probably will be like, why, this guy sent me an email coming to this meeting? I'm not coming. But they should be invited. And you need to record it and post it internally so people can see it over time, so that when they don't come, they can go back and look at it. And one of the reasons you're going to demo weekly is, again, to help people understand how to have and work in this iterative way. Because it turns out, if you can't demo every week, most likely you're doing something incremental, right? Because it doesn't take a week to make a sketch. And you can design the sketch to replace the sketch. Like, you didn't build it thinking you weren't going to delete it. You knew you were going to delete all that code. You just wanted to see it work end to end and see if it felt right, right? And so one barometer you can have is, how often can teams demo? If a team can't demo every week, they're probably on some journey that's loaded with risk that you need to figure out how to pull back in, right? Okay, you're going to choose the languages and tools that fit the job. So I think everybody in this room is a polyglot. At the very least, as a programmer, I don't speak any other actual spoken human languages because I'm bad at that, but I'm good at the computer language thing. And I think that learning new tools and learning new languages is actually one of the things that makes me happiest. Like, I find great joy in that activity. And I think, you probably do too. And so you should do that. You should let yourself do it. And since you're working in small batches and in tiny increments, and you're willing to throw away your earlier sketches, there's some safety here in just being like, yeah, I wrote the prototype in weird language X. Because you knew you were going to rewrite it anyway, because you wanted to be able to just demo what it was going to do, right? Now, this isn't a free license to just do crazy things. So a good example here would be, if you have a perfectly fine database, which you know how to operate and run and manage, and it's good, maybe it's not a super good idea to get super committed to another database for no good reason, just because you like it. But there's lots of places you can find that joy, and you should find it when you can. You're going to use source code control. So that's easy. The only note I really have on this, is anybody not using source code control? Raise your hand. Totally looking for someone so we can make fun of them. Okay, no one raised their hand. Derek, do you use source control? He does. He totally does. He's like, yeah, I've got a Git repo with all my stuff. Womp, womp, womp. Okay, so the one thing you got to have here is lightweight feature branches. You can use SVN or whatever, and it's fine, and I still like you. But later I'm going to tell you to do a lot of integration of these short branches, and so it's really good to be able to just have a branch for a second and then have it go away. So Git, Mercurial, Perforce, whatever. As long as you can do that, it's cool by me. You're going to have a bug database, and you're going to prioritize. That's the new thing. You're going to prioritize your bugs. That's a portmanteau of triage and prioritize, for those of you watching the video. Be nice to your customers. You know what sucks as a customer? I have a problem, I don't know where to put it, and you've never looked at it, which I am guilty of. So for the record, active voice. Okay. You're going to do continuous integration. Continuous integration means integrating your branches back to master. So it's not enough to be like, I can run my tests on a branch. That's not continuous integration, that's testing. Testing's dope, but it's not the same. What you're doing with that thing is merging it back to the main line all the goddamn time. Because then it's safe. Safe. Remember safety from earlier in the presentation? It's always safe to start new work. You don't have to think to yourself, don't start that project. There's long-running super special project branch X that's going to run for 9 months and before we merge it because it's too dangerous for the main line. And how's my new work going to work with super project branch X, and you all want to die? That's why you do continuous integration, because that is hell. It's a special kind of pain. So you're not going to do it. You're going to integrate. They're going to be short-lived. You're going to iterate on those branches. So you're not going to have the same branch that lives through every iteration you do. You're going to have a tiny branch and be like, sketch of Mona Lisa. Boom. And then you're going to be like, ooh, she's got colors. Boom. And then you're going to be like, I made it scale. And then someone's going to revert it and be like, you don't have a scale problem. Okay. You're going to fix the build when it goes red, because it will go red, because you're going to integrate to master just a smidge too aggressively. And that's fine, because I would rather edge on the side of you being aggressive than not. Or you'll use Chef Delivery and we'll pre-verify all your branches as if we hypothetically merge them to the branch you said you wanted them merged to when we tested them in the first place, like a boss. I got to have a little plug, right? Sales guys. Okay. You are never going to do anything unless another person sees it first. And I call this the four-eyed rule. So nothing happens in the infrastructure, nothing happens in your code, nothing happens in sales unless somebody else has looked at what you're doing. So if you haven't had 2 pairs of eyeballs minimum on the problem, you don't do it yet, right? And I don't care how you get there. If you're pair programming, if you're doing ubiquitous code review, if you're whatever it is, I just care that there's always more than 1 pair of eyes on the problem. So always 4 pairs of eyes. The watcher isn't real. So he sees everything that's important is the thing. Oh, he's gone. He's not even on the screen anymore. I'm the watcher now, so I don't count. Okay. You're going to write tests. So you're going to write 4 different kinds of tests in my book, and you're going to write them one at a time. So this is an important thing. I've been in a lot of places where people are like, we can't do whatever, usually continuous delivery, because we don't have any tests. So we're going to run a 6-month project to improve the test suite. Never, ever, ever, ever do that. Don't do it. Doesn't work. It's not helpful. And it's definitely not iterative. It's very incremental. You're like, what's the best test suite we could ever have? The test suite for Super Wrestle Sunday, right? You don't need it. You need one test. Start with a unit test. That's one function. Then you're going to have integration tests. These test multiple things together, right? Then you're going to have functional tests. These are user-oriented, high-level, full stack. And then you're going to have smoke tests. And these are actually, I think, one of the most important kinds of tests you can have. They're the short, quick tests that you can run that just tells you, is the system working like I wanted? So, for example, if you sell something with a shopping cart, can you push $1 through the shopping cart and see the dollar on the other side? That would be a great smoke test, right? Because you could probably ship anything as long as the dollar goes through and not have it be the worst disaster in the world, right? But you don't have to run your whole functional test suite to get there. You could just show the one that's like, I can still make $1. Woohoo, business is existing. Okay. You're going to do continuous delivery. And as you can see from this amazing diagram, and it is really epic, it's kind of complicated. And so to summarize it in a talk that has to end someday, it really works like this. Essentially, this means you can ship to your customer whatever product you want whenever you feel like it without drama. So, whenever you want to, can you just be like, yeah, here you go, have it, ship, 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 and you get a build, and you get a build, right? That's continuous delivery. And so, whether you ship or not is actually kind of irrelevant, right? So it's better to ship, I think, because if I'm a customer who wants a thing, it'd be great to give it to me. But really, I just want you to be able to, and it's a business decision to make a choice about whether you actually ship or don't. You're going to have one path for change to go through in your organization, and you're going to push as much change as possible down that same road. And so this is an example from delivery, right? So every change that goes through delivery goes through the verify stage first, and we make sure that anybody should look at it, and it goes through code review, and then we're going to build an asset, and then that asset's going to deploy into an acceptance environment, and then we're going to validate that acceptance environment, and then we're going to decide we want to ship it to a customer, and then we're going to put it into a union environment where we test it against other things. And then we're going to do it again in a rehearsal environment, because sometimes you break union, and then you fix it, but the fix only works because you broke it, which is a bummer. So you have to do it again. So I don't know why. You just do math. And then you're going to do it finally delivered in production. But that's how all change is going to work in your organization. And having that path be fixed, and if you look at how the organizations that move really fast that we aspire to, so I'll use Facebook again as a good example. When you go to Facebook, no one ever says, how do I do this to this subsystem? Not really. Like, the basic shape of how they work, it's pretty much the same. They're like, well, you're gonna type this command, arc, or I think arc is right, whatever it is, and like it's gonna start a review, and then someone's gonna look at it, and then it's gonna do some stuff. And the specifics of stuff is really different, right? So like stuff could be way different. But in the end, the pattern they took, the path that it flowed was the same. And what that lets you do is have conversations like, it's stuck in union. Right? And everybody knows what it means. They're like, oh, right. That means you've already decided to ship it. You tested it yourself. It looked good. You believed it would work. But when you tried it with someone else's stuff, it broke. That's pretty great. Like, I want to know what that means. And so having that one path that things move on, that's one of the things that allows you to really move fast. And it comes back to that muda and waste and pull through analogy, where most of those other paths, you don't need many of them. Now, they have to be designed to reinforce the principles you hold and aid flow. The other reason you constrict it is because now you never have to think to yourself, how and where will I go to make a change, right? You'll just go to the place you make changes, right? It's pretty easy. Etsy is another good example of this. You know how you deploy Etsy? You hit the little button. Doesn't matter what you're deploying, I think, right? Pretty much. At least that's the theory, right? I bet there's a bunch of shadow deployment systems, but like that's how you do it if you're supposed to be doing it right. And it's flexible at the level of execution. So like I said, even though inside of here there's lots of different specifics of what we do, the generalities of the path hold. Okay, Your code's going to go through the same workflow. All code goes through the same path. Applications are code, and so is your infrastructure. And so you need to not have two different paths for how they change. So your infrastructure is code, and it's going to go through the same path that your application code goes through to get itself into production. You're going to focus on availability. And you're going to do that. So let's define availability here first. So availability is uptime over uptime plus downtime. You're going to focus your efforts on availability on reducing the mean time to diagnose. So how long does it take to figure out that you have a problem? And then how long does it take to fix the problem after you know what it is? So you're trying to reduce mean time to diagnose, and you're trying to reduce mean time to repair. And you're going to remember that failure is inevitable, and it's how you detect and react to it that matters most. You're going to collect metrics kind of obsessively. It's one of the great things about being a systems administrator is we get charts and graphs. Who loves charts and graphs? We need to shout out for charts and graphs. Woo, charts and graphs! I love me a good chart and graph. I got hired Nicole Forsgren. She has a PhD in chart and graph. Okay, so, because there's nothing better than a graph that has a scientist behind it being like, your math is good. Okay, or your math is bad and it doesn't matter because she's a PhD, so she can tell you that, and it's cool. Okay, so you're going to collect metrics from all over the things. You're going to do operating system metrics, network metrics, application metrics, how your process is working, how the flow goes, all these metrics, so many metrics. The resolution of these metrics matter because one of the reasons you're collecting them is to use them in the time it takes you to detect and diagnose and fix a failure, right? And so let's just go on a journey where you decide it's good enough to collect your metrics every 5 minutes. And then you wonder why it is that you have hours and hours of agonizing downtime over a long period of time. Well, it takes you 5 minutes just to know that something could be wrong. And God help you if in order to know it's actually wrong, you need to correlate 2 or 3 of those metrics and they're on a scattered time plot and you're not quite sure how they come together, right? So that resolution really makes a difference. You need to set it based on how good you want to actually be at your availability. And you need to have as few systems of these as possible. You'll probably have more than one because, hey, like you'll want to, and they're not all the same. But the fewer of them you have, the easier it will be to correlate those metrics together and get things done. You're going to plan for capacity. You're going to identify key metrics. You're going to put them on a graph. You're going to set limits on that graph based on when you think it'll break. You're going to plot a trend line, and you're going to expand your time horizon. This is what God intended you to do when you decided to build systems for a living. And the part of you that says, I don't have to do capacity planning. I'm in the cloud. That part is dumb, and you need to build a chart with a trend line. Because your customers hate you when you run out of capacity because you only collected metrics every 5 frickin' minutes, and it takes 15 minutes to spin up new goddamn servers. And so, sure, man, you failed for half an hour mostly, and then it was cool and you auto-scaled. So just build a graph. God. Okay. Right? It's Kungfu. Sometimes we get a little feisty. All right. We're going to only alert on the things that are actionable. This is my favorite slide. I got help from Irving Popovetsky's daughter on some of these pictures, and she chose this for alert, and I think she crushed it. So let's have a round of applause for Irving's daughter. It's a big purple clock. Okay, you're going to only alert on what is actionable. You're going to get the attention of the right human beings. You're going to set as few alerts as possible. You're going to route them only to the people who can take action. So if you receive an alert, which you cannot do something about, you're going to figure out how to change the routing and route it to someone who can, or kill the alert. You're going to start with one alert, and if you don't have it, you're going to go build it right now. And it's the alert that tells you, is the system up? And by up, I mean, is it doing the thing that people are supposed to be doing so that they like the thing that it's doing? So if your job is making money, are you making money? Is it up, right? Okay. So then you get this alert, and you're like, whew, I got an alert, and it's actionable, and it's my thing, and I know what to do. And so what you're going to do is practice incident response. And the first thing there, we talk about this as the OODA loop. There's a fighter jet there, because that's where it comes from. But you're not a fighter pilot, and it's worth remembering that you're not. Unless you are. Is there a fighter pilot in the room? That person can do the real OODA loop. There's like one guy, okay. Or he's stretching. Well, I'm going to say you're a fighter pilot. Okay, so... no one else can see you. Okay, so orient is the step that matters most in the OODA loop. And so there's this story that I think is great where Ken Thompson and Rob Pike were pair programming on early versions of Unix, right? And I want to believe it was Ken Thompson. It was Rob Pike who was typing because he typed faster than Ken Thompson. And if I get it wrong, I'm sorry to both of them. And so they were typing away, and they would encounter bugs. And Rob's reaction to the bug would be to fire up the debugger and like go chasing after the bug. He would hunt the bug down with force and furious anger. And meanwhile, Ken Thompson would stand behind him and stroke his beard. Be like, bug. And like Ken's, and Rob's and like attacking the keyboard. Ken's just standing there thinking. And then he'd be like, so, I think it's, look at this file, like line 52. And Rob would open it up, and there would be the bug. And then not only would there be the bug, but he would know the architectural reason the bug existed, and he would make the entire code base more robust. And in that moment, what he was doing was using his knowledge of the code base, and his knowledge of the system, and his knowledge of all the ways that it could fail, and he was orienting himself to the problem, right? He was just, given all the stuff I know about what this is, what could possibly be the reason? And then he'd whittled it all the way down, and his guesses were right because he was taking time to orient. And you can do the same thing. So when you get an alert, don't just run at the problem. It's not about having the OODA loop be the fastest loop and a million iterations, although that can work, but that's what Rob Pike was doing. He'd have found the bug eventually, but how long would it have taken? And if he'd have just stopped and stroked his beard, maybe it would have been cool. Whoever gets the alert is the first responder. They're the default incident commander. They decide what to do next. They coordinate resources. They communicate status. It's not about rank, and there's only one incident commander. Incidents lead to postmortems. Those postmortems run like this. You're going to invoke the space, describe the incident, establish the timeline, identify contributing factors, describe the customer impact, describe the remediation task, and describe the improvement task for a response process. This is Mark Burgess. Mark Burgess is the only person who has ever done the science of configuration management, and every single person in this room needs to give him a round of applause. Let's hear it from Mark Burgess. Mark Burgess is also the best-looking man in configuration management by a mile. Every single photograph, it's not like it's one photograph, it's like every picture you've ever seen of him, he's so good-looking. Okay, so, I love you, Mark, it's not weird. Okay, so you're going to do what Mark told you to do when you think about how you're going to design your systems, because Mark was right. And I'm going to boil Mark down into 4 bullet points, and if I get it wrong again, Mark, I'm so sorry. But you're going to work on autonomous actors. You're going to look at the components of your system, you're going to figure out what they do, and you're going to make them responsible for their own selves. They're going to figure out how to make progress toward their goal, whether you're paying attention to them or not. So those autonomous actors know what they're supposed to do, and they're going to figure out how to do it as best they can, whether you're paying attention or not. They're going to make clear promises to other actors. I'm a web server. I will serve web traffic. And then there's a load balancer who looks at that thing and validates whether or not you're serving the right or good traffic, right? So its job is to evaluate that promise, look at the quality of it. If you're not doing the right thing, stop serving the traffic, right? And if you follow Mark's principles, if you follow these principles of scalable systems design, what you will wind up with is systems that are easier to operate because they're more resilient in the face of a bunch of edge conditions that you didn't understand, because what they're doing in these tiny little pieces is just doing their very bestest to continue to make progress on their little goal, right? And it's way easier than building the big complicated system that has a guy in the middle who's like, you're not doing the right thing, do your thing. You're not doing the right thing, do your thing. So listen to Mark Burgess, he's right. You're going to have some humility about your code, about your position, about your knowledge. You're going to design your code to favor simplicity and extensibility and reuse. And the thing about this is, you're not going to start with simple systems. You start with the most complicated idea possible for your problem. That's where you start every time. You're like, oh, we got this problem. What will we do? And you make it really complicated and hard. And then you run all these really short, iterative life cycles where you're stripping out the complexity because you're encountering the things you don't need. And by the time you get to the end, you have this kind of glorious, tiny thing that was just enough, right? Okay, whew. Let's take a breath. I don't have very much longer, so I got to go fast because I didn't go fast enough. I got caught up. Let's talk about application. So you're going to take this Kungfu and you're going to go out into the world and you're going to do something valuable with it, and it's going to be unique to yourself. And so in that moment, the thing that you're going to do over everything is trust in your training. You're going to remember the principles. You're going to remember why you're doing this and what the outcomes are you're really trying to achieve and why DevOps matters to you and why you need it to yourself, in your organization, in your friends, in your family. You're going to practice these forms that I've gone through. You're going to do them, and you're going to do them over and over and over again. And through that long practice, you'll become so good at it that you'll forget that you ever had to even learn. And you're going to use your discernment and your judgment to understand in the right moment to do the right thing. And by doing it, you're going to wind up having a unique style. right? So it's going to be all your own. I have my unique style, you have yours, and it's going to be your special magical thing, and that's awesome. But if you remember earlier, I told you that what we're doing with our DevOps is transforming these giant businesses to operate in a super different way. And I think that's the equivalent of Mr. Miyagi telling Daniel-san that he's going to have to fight the whole school at the beginning of his training, right? So, if at the beginning of the Karate Kid, he'd be like, all right, I'll teach you karate, but first you're going to have to beat up all these people. Daniel-san would have gone home and locked himself in his room, right? No movie. And so the way that we do this is by teaching you and building a safe space for learning. So Mr. Miyagi did that by being like, wash my car, right? And then eventually, he threw a punch and they had a little sparring match, and that was cool. And so in the same way, we have that for DevOps. And so this is a thing I call the DevOps circle. And this is a thing you can do with all the different people in your organization to practice your skills in a safe and short way. So in the same way that if you're doing wushu, you might have a sparring match. This is the business equivalent of a sparring match with your DevOps Kung Fu. And so it starts with a business problem that you think you want to try to solve by applying these principles. You gather together all the people that matter to DevOps, which it turns out is everybody. So you're going to have product people, engineers, sales reps, all these people. And you're going to get together for 8 weeks. And you're going to work on that business problem using all of your DevOps Kung Fu as good as you can, right? Kind of trying to live all of your best ideals in a really short order. And then you're going to evaluate whether you like the results. Okay, how do you run a DevOps circle? Stage 1, you're going to select a problem. So it has to be small enough to have a meaningful iteration in 8 weeks, and it's not an iteration if you don't do it more than one time. So it's got to be actually pretty small. It needs to be vertical, not horizontal. So a bad one would be fix patch management for GE. Bad one, too horizontal. You could say fix patch management for this particular set of servers. That's pretty good. It's vertical. Stage 2, you're going to state your purpose and write it down. So you're going to figure out why we're doing it, and it needs to be bigger than the task at hand. So it's not the business problem. It's the reason you have the business problem, right? It's why you're trying to fix it at all. You're going to write down what you believe are going to create good outcomes. You're going to start with those principles of DevOps. You're going to then add in the things that matter, that are unique to you. Then you're going to empower your team to solve that problem for 8 weeks, right? You're going to be like, all right, guys, you can do whatever you need to do. 8 weeks, go. And then you're going to be available for the context that team will need that you did not give them because you didn't know everything when you started. Then you're going to do some product development. You're going to write down the value proposition of the solution you think is going to solve this business problem. You're going to build a roadmap for the work you're going to do. You're going to set themes for that roadmap. You're going to have outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And then you're going to kind of just try to figure out what features you think you're going to need to build over that 8-week spike in order to get it done. You're going to make sure that you include something delightful. So it can't just be, here's the bare minimum of all the things we have to do to solve our jury business problem. Like, you got to find the thing in there that's going to be dope, right? So if you haven't found the dope thing, you got to find it. Then you're going to focus on simplicity, extensibility, and reuse when you actually sit down to iterate on your code. And you're going to get there through making sure you take short iterations of your problem. So during those iterations, you're going to manage your risk through small batches. You're going to validate them with your customers. You're going to go, hey, I think we should do this. We did this. Is that right? Do you like it? And they'll be like, yep, I like it. You're going to choose the languages and tools that fit the job. And so if one of the things you need to do to get excited about having a little DevOps circle is trying Clojure, great, write it in Clojure. You're going to ignore scale. You don't have a scale problem. It's only an 8-week project. So whenever somebody says, but I think we need to take the time to make this more scalable, what are you going to say? No. That's right. There's no scale problem. You don't have one. Okay, when arguing about theory, you're going to focus on execution. So during this 8-week project, somewhere on day 1, hour 2, you're going to get into this really bike-shitty argument about what you might could theory, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to be like, we only have 8 weeks. We're going to execute. Okay, and you're going to demo every single week. Then you're going to iterate on features. You're going to use source control, have a bug database. You're going to have one workflow for change, and you're going to make sure that nothing happens without 4 eyes on top of it. Then you're going to do continuous integration. You're going to do continuous delivery. So you're going to make it so that every moment you could ship, you can. You can do this in 8 weeks. You know, the first thing you're going to ship is like hello world, right? You're going to do one test at a time. You're never going to write more than one test. You're going to write just the tests you need and no more tests. Then you're going to use scalable systems design to make sure that when you go to operate this thing, you just don't get boned by a million edge cases you couldn't think of. Then you're going to go operate it. You're going to focus on its availability. You're going to collect metrics about the project. You're going to plan for its capacity to make sure that it's going to work when you're done. You're going to alert on the things that are actionable. When they go wrong, and they should go wrong because you're deploying so often that some things slip through, you're going to run incident response, and you're going to hold postmortems. Then you're going to do one last demo, because you've been demoing every week to the whole company, and you're going to wrap up your DevOps circle and be like, here's all the stuff we learned about what it feels like to have super strong DevOps Kung Fu, and it was awesome. And you're going to hold a retrospective where you talk to each other about what the experience was like of using your Kung Fu to solve this business problem in this super fast, really tight, super connected way. And that, in a nutshell, is how you're going to practice chef-style DevOps Kung Fu. And so if you liked this talk and this resonated with you, if you saw your Kung Fu and my Kung Fu, you can send a pull request to this GitHub repo and add your name. And now you too are a member of my new school of DevOps Kung Fu. And whenever someone wants to know, what do you mean by DevOps? Whenever you see my marketing dudes use the word DevOps, you can just go back to this presentation and be like, that's what they mean. They're talking about that thing. And if you don't like it as much, you don't want to help me figure out what those principles and forms are, because it should evolve over time, then you can start your own school. The whole thing's under the Creative Commons. You can fork it, make your own school. All you got to say is it's a derivative of chef style. And so as you go out into the world to do your own Kung Fu, as you figure out how you're going to go fight, I have some parting words of wisdom, and they are this. First, DevOps is a real thing. I can feel it in the world. I do it myself. I see other people doing it all the time. DevOps is real, and it is legit, and it is honest, and I know it when I see it. And I know it through the application of these universal principles and these universal beliefs that I believe everyone who's doing it holds dear. And I practice DevOps every day through those forms that I put up on that slide. And everybody I work with and everybody I know who has really strong Kung Fu, they practice it every single day too, and they apply it to their daily work, even if what their work isn't technical. And my practice is unique to me. I work at Chef. I've had the experience that I've had, and your practice will be unique to you as well. And so while we can share that definition, and while we can share that belief of what's going to create great outcomes, and we can use that to tie ourselves together as a community that needs to get better at our Kung Fu, in the end, it's about you figuring out the right thing in your environment and doing it for great justice. Thank you so much.